Let's kick off with the football first of all. I mean, what an absolute shambles. Some people this morning, believe it or not, actually saying it's not Gareth Southgate's fault. I'm not one of them.
Oh, well, if there are people who are saying that, I've yet to meet those people because I think it's pretty much universally accepted that England has a uniquely talented group of players, and that the one constant seems to be that whenever we get to a major tournament, we play in a very sort of sluggish way. It's because of the manager, and everybody can see that it's because he gets his basic tactics wrong. Over and over again, we have to sit through this. He was very good in the sort of the short term. We brought him in as a stopgap.
Right.
He did better than expected. And so we've kept going with him. And it's almost like, dare I say it, having a Tory government. Actually,
Yes.
things are slightly better in the short term because they aren't Labour. And you think, oh, we'll stick with these people for a decade or so. And then things just get worse.
Right.
That's Gareth Southgate in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that brings us nicely on to who we're about to possibly put into the Downing Street as the new manager, not of England, but of Great Britain. Rishi Sunak and Kier Starma were in with Ed Davey and John Swinney last night. Let's have a look at Kier Starma when he was asked about Jeremy Corbyn.
But you also campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister.
Campaigning for the Labour Party. I was a Labour politician. I wanted to be elected or re-elected, and I wanted good colleagues to be re-elected.
Just answer this,
Some of the
then.
people around the shadow cabinet table were people whose seats were saved because we campaigned hard for the Labour Party.
Just answer this yes or no. When you said Jeremy Corbyn would make a good Prime Minister, did you mean it?
Look, he would be a better Prime Minister. Well, look what we got, Boris Johnson. A man who made massive promises, didn't keep them, and then had to leave Parliament in disgrace.
Did you think he'd make a great, not even just a good, a great Prime Minister?
I didn't think we were in a position to win that election.
He won't say it, will he? But eventually he did actually say, Benedict, that he thought Jeremy Corbyn would have been a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson, which I think shocked quite a few people.
It's that thing that he just can't quite get away from is his time serving in Corbyn's shadow cabinet. And I mean, as much as you have to say, he's done a decent enough job of detoxifying the Labour Party up to a point in the post-Corbyn era. You can't take that away from him. He's been sort of very consistent. He's behaved much like you would expect a good QC to do in a very sort of methodical, thorough way. He's been very fair to a lot of people who are frankly idiots and keep putting their feet in their mouths. So, I think his actions on that say one thing. But again, there's no getting away from the fact that he did say these things whilst he was serving under Jeremy Corbyn. He did campaign. It's all very well for him to come out subsequently and say, oh, well, I never thought we were going to win that election. Great. That doesn't really make it any better. On the subject of saying Jeremy Corbyn might have made a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson, do you know what? That sort of wild hypothetical is an incredibly unhelpful thing to do. But because we don't know how people would have worked in certain circumstances, maybe Jeremy Corbyn would have been fantastic under COVID. I doubt it, but maybe he would.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I would take away from all of it is always going to be, who would you have rather had in charge of this country when the Ukraine war broke out? Mr. I don't believe in war, Mr. Pacifist, Mr. Get rid of all weapons and just sing Kumbaya, and also Hamas aren't a bad bunch. Or would you have rather had the guy that sent the Ukrainians the weapons, the diplomatic aid, the military aid straight away, and by the Ukrainian government's own admission, gave them that sort of time, bought them that sort of resources that allowed the rest of Europe to get its act together and allowed the Americans to get its act together? Ukrainians are pretty clear. Boris Johnson did wonderful things for them, and I just don't think Jeremy Corbyn would have done the same.
Well, no, because let's not forget he was also the same man that said in the House of Commons that we thought we should take time before we thought that the Novichok attack in Salisbury had anything to do with Russia. So we know on which side his loyalties lie there. Let's have a look at Rishi Sunak, because the big story this morning, and still rumbling on and still enlarging itself really, is this betting scandal surrounding the number of Tory party members, close friends, close associates of Rishi Sunak, who were clearly betting on the outcome of the election one day before it was announced. Here's Rishi Sunak.
Well, like you, I was incredibly angry to learn of these allegations. It's a really serious matter. It's right that they're being investigated properly by the relevant law enforcement authorities, including, as Fiona said, a criminal investigation by the police. I want to be crystal clear that if anyone has broken the rules, they should face the full force of the law, and that's what those investigations are there to do, and I hope that they do their work as quickly and as thoroughly as possible.
Well, the full force of the law may well be what we see in the end, but one of those individuals, and I'm not going to say his name because last time I said it we had to reel off all the other candidates in his constituency, but the one individual who's admitted making the bet is still a candidate. So, you know, how really can Rishi Sunak expect to be taken seriously if he says, oh, well, they will all face the full force of the law?
Well, they're all going to face the full force of the electorate before they do that. So I suppose he's probably sat there thinking, do you know what, maybe I can leave this to be somebody else's responsibility. Somebody else can deal with it. But, you know, I almost felt sorry for him when the audience member asked the question, because you could just see his face. He sort of sat there thinking, you know, I'm bad enough, but how on earth can I account for half-wits in my administration whose first thought when they discover when the election is not keep stum and everybody pull in the right direction, but let's get on Betfair, let's see if I can make a bit of a flutter and sort of satisfy my own dopamine hit. Oh, and by the way, I'm also going to tell, you know, half a dozen of my mates to do the same thing. It just shows you, I think, the lack of seriousness in his own administration. Of course, that all comes down to him. You know, he's the prime minister. He's supposed to be the one who sets the tone and is in charge of discipline and all that. But so, honestly, how on earth can you, all the other things that have gone wrong, and then out of nowhere it turns out, yeah, people were having a flutter when they found out, rather than preparing for the actual election. Perhaps if they'd done that, they might be in a slightly better state.
Well, exactly. And these are not just members of the administration, not just members of the Tory government. These are people who are associated with the organisation of the campaign. You know, one of them was one of the campaign directors, for heaven's sake. And 2 weeks away from the election, the campaign director has taken leave of absence.
I mean, supposedly also it tipped off the Labour Party as to what was happening, because they were able to scrape data from the various betting websites and found a massive spike in people putting money on that date, which you kind of think, you know, that's basic stuff that they should have been able to see. The Tories should have been able to see that that's not the wisest thing to do. But again, as I say, it's just the attitude of people who are fundamentally unserious. And we get it. They've been unserious about winning this election for some time now. The evidence is how they've behaved. But still, I think we would all appreciate parties that at least had the veneer of taking the idea of being re-elected seriously. And at no point have they.
No, exactly right. One of the big stories this morning as well, which has taken a turn because Rachel Rees made the statement at the Times CEO Summit here at News UK just yesterday. It looks as though the VAT on schools story is going to be pushed sort of slightly into longer grass, and it won't take effect until possibly September of 2025. I wonder if this is them reconsidering whether this is actually a great idea.
I think most sensible people are probably sat there reading this story this morning thinking, oh, maybe this is the first sign of a climb down.
Yeah.
More in hope than anything else. I suspect it will still come in. I think that what they're doing now is they're pushing it back so that they can say to parents and to schools, look, we're giving you lots of time to get your affairs in order, to get your houses together, to work out how it is that you're going to help the poorest students. Perhaps you can find bursaries, perhaps you can find donors, and they'll frame that as a sort of well, that's us being fair, that's us being magnanimous. We're not going to come in and hit you retroactively halfway through the school year. No, we wouldn't do that. So I think that's what that's about. But I do think that they will bring it in because they've just trailed it for so long. It would be embarrassing not to go through with it. And because it's proper class war stuff. It's bread and butter stuff to so many Labour MPs and activists. And I can imagine the howls of fury from his own backbenchers once elected if he went, oh, actually, no, the private school kids, they're going to be allowed to go to school as normal. We're not going to jeopardize their future. Because ultimately, a lot of Labour MPs and Labour activists do not care about academic outcomes. They just want to take as much money from middle-class people as they can. That's what their motivation is. So I think he will hold on to it for a little bit of time, and it'll later on give him an easy win from his own MPs. So I can see it being the sort of thing that is wheeled out perhaps when other policies don't quite work out and the government begins to flail, for him to bring it out, this little shiny object, and go, ha-ha, taxing private schools. Yes. And they'll go, ah, yes, we remember, fantastic.
Although, interestingly enough, we raised a question yesterday about faith schools and whether they would also be taxed at the same rate VAT-wise. And we haven't quite got the straight answer we wanted from the Labour Party yet, because I'm not even sure if they thought about it, because Muslim schools and Jewish schools in particular, you know, they don't charge as much as private schools, but they do charge money. And if they had to pay VAT, then they could be affected as well.
They could be, and obviously that would be politically very difficult, but I do imagine that they would end up having VAT charged on them, because actually I think once you've made the call that it's just all fee-paying schools anyway, you can't then have little caveats. And if you did have little caveats, you'd have to have caveats for everybody. I suspect he's not saying it because, I mean, as you allude to, Jewish schools, he's done a very good job relatively of trying to rebuild ties with the country's Jewish community, but also they do rely heavily on the Muslim vote. We all know, anybody who's watching this right now will see images of Angela Rayner on their screen. Well, of course, we've all seen the footage of Angela Rayner going to a mosque and promising policies on things like Gaza and Islamophobia. So, they're not going to talk about that during the election cycle, but I can absolutely imagine that they would do that once in power.
Yeah, absolutely right. Benedict, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Benedict Spence, their political commentator, with his take on what happened last night and the big stories politically doing the rounds today.